The black maid slapped the billionaire's wife to awaken a family falling apart. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. Imagine this, a grand estate, a luxurious mansion nestled in the heart of the city, with marble floors that gleam like polished glass. The grandeur of the home is matched only by the wealth of its occupants. But beneath the lavish surface, cracks are forming, unseen by the outside world. The family is crumbling. The marriage is on the rocks, and the woman at the heart of it all, the wife of the billionaire, seems to be the only one unaware of how far things have gone. It's a marriage built on appearances, held together by wealth, but hollow inside. The tension is palpable, the silence between them deafening. Every glance exchanged, every word spoken, carries a weight of regret, of resentment, of a relationship hanging by a thread. Enter Maya, the black maid. To most, she is invisible, just another face in the background, quietly working in the shadows of the mansion. She knows her place, and she has always kept her head down, doing her job without complaint. But Maya is no ordinary maid. She's a woman of strength, of quiet wisdom, and of deep understanding. She sees what others don't. She knows the truth. Maya is aware of the distance between the billionaire and his wife. She has witnessed the late-night arguments, the cold silences over breakfast, the lack of warmth in their home. And she has silently carried the burden of knowing that this family is falling apart. But there's something else Maya knows, something the billionaire's wife doesn't. Maya knows the cost of pretending, the pain of living a lie. She has seen the cracks, and she knows that if they're not addressed, they will grow wider, more destructive. One afternoon, as the wife of the billionaire walks through the grand hallway, wrapped in the arrogance of wealth, Maya sees her, the woman who has everything, but is slowly losing it all. The wife mocks Maya in passing, tossing a condescending smile her way, as if Maya's presence is nothing more than an inconvenience. The words sting, but Maya remains calm, keeping her gaze steady. She's been mocked before. She's been underestimated. But today, something is different. Today, Maya will not be silent. Maya takes a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest, as the wife walks past her. In a split second, without hesitation, Maya slaps her. The sound of the slap echoes through the hallway, sharp and loud, silencing the room. The billionaire's wife freezes, her face turning pale in shock. She had expected everything except this. The moment hangs in the air, heavy with meaning. The wife's eyes widen, her mouth opens, but no words come out. Maya stands tall, her posture unwavering, and for the first time in years, the wife of the billionaire sees her, not as the maid, not as the invisible worker, but as a woman who has the power to awaken her from the numbness that has consumed her life. The billionaire's wife stands there, stunned, unsure of what just happened. Maya doesn't wait for a response. She turns and walks away, leaving the billionaire's wife standing in the hallway, frozen in place, her mind racing. What just happened? Why did she slap me? But more importantly, why did it feel like I deserved it? Maya's act of defiance, her refusal to accept being invisible any longer, is the beginning of a change. A shift that will reverberate through this crumbling family. The question now is, will the billionaire's wife open her eyes to the truth, or will she continue to live in denial? The slap was more than just an act of physical force. It was a wake-up call, a moment of reckoning that could either save or destroy them all. The billionaire's wife stood frozen in the hallway, still reeling from the slap that had just echoed through the house. Her mind was a whirlwind of confusion, and her hand instinctively pressed to her cheek, still stinging from the force of Maya's unexpected strike. She had never been slapped before, not like this, not by someone she considered so beneath her. Maya, the black maid who had always been in the background, never demanding attention, never speaking out of turn. And yet today, she had done the unthinkable. She had slapped her, leaving the wife of the billionaire standing in stunned silence. The world seemed to stop for a moment. The luxurious hallway with its gleaming marble floors and expensive artwork now feeling oppressive, suffocating. Maya, standing tall and unwavering, walked away without a word, leaving the wife to grapple with the shock of what had just transpired. The silence between them stretched on, and the wife's gaze followed Maya as she disappeared around the corner. For the first time, she wasn't sure what to think, let alone feel. She had always been in control. She had always been the one who called the shots, who ordered everyone around. But Maya's slap had done something more than hurt her pride. It had shaken her to her core. In that moment, the wife began to question herself. She was no longer sure of the power she had always wielded. As the minutes passed, the shock slowly gave way to something else, a deep, gnawing sense of guilt. Why had Maya slapped her? What had she done to provoke such a response? The answer was simple, yet it eluded her. She had treated Maya as less than human, as nothing more than a servant, someone who existed only to serve her whims. And she had been blind to Maya's humanity, to the quiet strength she carried. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. The truth that Maya had been carrying all these years, hidden beneath her service and her silence, had finally come to the surface. Maya was not just a maid. She was a person, with thoughts, with emotions, with dignity. And she had had enough. Meanwhile, Maya, who had left the wife in that state of stunned silence, felt a strange sense of peace. The weight of the house had always felt heavy on her shoulders, but now, for the first time in years, it felt lighter. She had never spoken up before, never demanded respect. She had always accepted her position, always kept her head down. But that slap, it had felt right. It had felt like something had finally shifted. Maya had not only taken a stand for herself, but she had also forced the wife of the billionaire to face the reality she had been ignoring for so long. For years, she had watched as the family's cracks grew wider. The constant tension, the unspoken words, the coldness between the couple, it was all there, evident to anyone who cared to see it. And now, Maya had made the wife see it too. The question was, would the wife acknowledge the truth? Would she finally understand the cost of her actions, of the way she had treated Maya and the others around her? Or would she retreat into her world of denial and pride? Maya couldn't wait to see what would happen next. For now, she had done what she needed to do. She had woken the wife up, and now, the real challenge was whether the billionaire's wife would be able to confront the truth about her life, her marriage, and the family that was falling apart. The wife of the billionaire stood in the hallway, her hand still pressed against her cheek where Maya had slapped her. The sting was no longer physical. It had settled deep within her, a painful reminder of how far she had let things go. For the first time, she felt vulnerable, exposed. The world she had built around her, the world of wealth, power, and control, was crumbling, and Maya, the black maid she had so often dismissed, was the catalyst for this realization. She felt something shift inside her, something she had been avoiding for years. The guilt started to gnaw at her, a constant reminder that she had lost sight of what truly mattered. The house that once felt like her kingdom now felt cold, empty. The echoes of Maya's slap resonated through the grand rooms, a reminder of the many times she had treated people like Maya as invisible, as nothing more than tools to maintain her world. As she walked toward the family room, her thoughts consumed her. The man who was supposed to be her partner, her husband, was distant, withdrawn. Their marriage had become a shell, a mere formality. She had ignored it, too busy with appearances and social obligations, and now she realized how much she had failed to see. She had failed to nurture not only her marriage, but also the family she had promised to care for. Her mind wandered to the many times Maya had been in the background, silently observing, and now it dawned on her. Maya knew. Maya understood the cracks in the facade that no one else dared to acknowledge. Maya had seen the truth, and now she had made the wife face it. The question was, would she choose to face it or retreat back into the comfort of denial? Hours passed, but the silence between the wife and her husband remained. He hadn't said a word about the slap, about the tension, and the growing chasm in their relationship. She sat in the living room, the weight of her thoughts pressing down on her. She couldn't escape the reality that was unfolding before her. It was too much to ignore any longer. She had spent years hiding behind her wealth, behind the perfect image of a billionaire's wife, but the truth was much uglier than she had ever imagined. She had allowed herself to become a prisoner of her own pride. The doorbell rang, breaking her thoughts. She wasn't expecting anyone. When she opened the door, she found Maya standing there, looking as calm as ever. For a moment, there was a silent exchange between them, a look that said more than words could. Maya didn't speak at first, just stood there, waiting for the wife to say something. Finally, the wife broke the silence. "Why did you do it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Maya's eyes met hers, steady and unwavering. "Because someone needed to wake you up," she said simply. The words hit the wife like a punch in the gut. Maya wasn't just talking about the slap. She was talking about everything. The way the wife had been living her life, the way she had treated the people around her, the way she had allowed her marriage to fall apart. The wife felt a lump form in her throat, but she didn't know what to say. How could she explain the years of neglect, the pride, the inability to see the truth? She had been too blind, too caught up in herself. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice breaking. Maya's answer was simple but profound. "I want you to see your family, to see what's been happening. I want you to fix what's broken before it's too late." The words hung in the air, and for the first time in a long while, the wife felt something shift within her. It wasn't just guilt anymore. It was the beginning of something else, a chance to rebuild, to fix the pieces she had ignored for so long. Maya turned to leave, but before she walked away, she paused. "You have a choice now," she said, her voice steady. "You can either ignore this moment, or you can make it count." With that, Maya walked away, leaving the wife standing on the doorstep, her mind racing, her heart torn. She had been given a chance, but the real question was, would she take it? The wife stood motionless at the door, Maya's words echoing in her mind. "You have a choice now," Maya had said before leaving. It was a moment that left the wife feeling exposed, vulnerable. The grand mansion that once felt like her fortress now felt like a cage. Every piece of it, every expensive rug, every chandelier, every painting, was a constant reminder of the life she had built, the life she had neglected. The silence in the house was suffocating, heavier now than it had ever been. She had spent years turning a blind eye to the cracks in her marriage, to the coldness that had slowly crept between her and her husband. But now, those cracks were impossible to ignore, and Maya's slap had been the wake-up call she never knew she needed. As she stood in the doorway, she could hear the faint sound of her husband moving around upstairs, his footsteps echoing through the halls. He had not spoken to her since the incident, not a word. The distance between them had grown even wider since Maya's bold act of defiance. The wife closed her eyes and took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She had always prided herself on being in control, on being the woman who could handle everything. But now, everything was slipping through her fingers. She had spent so much time focusing on appearances, on maintaining the image of the perfect family, that she had forgotten what truly mattered. She had forgotten what it meant to be a wife, a mother, a partner. She thought of the slap, the force with which it had landed, and how it had shocked her to her core. It wasn't just the physical sting that hurt. It was the realization that she had allowed herself to become a stranger in her own life. The woman who had always been in control, who had always looked down on those beneath her, was now forced to confront the truth. It was the truth that Maya had made her see. She had been a part of a family that was falling apart, and she had done nothing to stop it. The wife turned away from the door, her mind racing with thoughts of what to do next. She could continue to ignore the truth, to pretend that everything was fine, or she could do something about it. The choice was hers now, but for the first time in years, she wasn't sure what the right choice was. Her husband, the billionaire, had always been distant, emotionally unavailable. The love they once shared had long since faded, replaced by routine and resentment. She had convinced herself that their marriage was fine, that they were just going through a rough patch. But now, with Maya's slap lingering in her thoughts, she could no longer deny the cracks that had formed between them. Her mind kept going back to Maya, the woman who had been invisible to her for so long, who had worked tirelessly to keep the mansion running, who had silently observed the disintegration of the family. Maya had seen the truth all along, and now, the wife was forced to face it. She had always thought of Maya as nothing more than a servant, someone who existed to make her life easier. But now, Maya had shown her that she was so much more than that. Maya was the one who had the courage to stand up, to speak the truth, to take control when everyone else had stayed silent. The wife felt a pang of guilt, mixed with something else, admiration. She didn't know what Maya's future held, but she knew one thing for certain. Maya had changed her life. Maya had given her the opportunity to change her own, and that was something she wasn't going to waste. The next morning, the wife of the billionaire found herself sitting alone at the kitchen table, the silence around her almost unbearable. She hadn't slept well, her mind spinning with the events of the past few days. Maya's slap had shaken her to the core, but it wasn't just the slap that kept her up. It was everything that came after. The guilt, the realization of how far she had drifted from the life she had once hoped for. The realization that her marriage was a facade, a hollow shell that had been falling apart for years. She had always been the one to maintain the image of the perfect family. The beautiful house, the perfectly groomed children, the loving husband. All of it was supposed to be a reflection of her success. But Maya had shattered that illusion with one simple act. The wife had always dismissed the people around her, staff, cleaners, anyone who wasn't part of her inner circle. Maya was just another maid in her eyes, someone to be controlled, someone to serve her needs. She had never once considered that Maya, in her quiet observation, had been the only one to see the truth. The truth that she had ignored for so long. The truth that her marriage was suffocating, and that she was living in a house full of ghosts. Her husband had become more of a stranger to her with each passing day. They no longer spoke unless necessary. The affection that had once bound them together had evaporated, leaving behind only the remnants of what they had once shared. Now, sitting alone at the kitchen table, she could no longer deny that the marriage was over. The question was, what would she do about it? Could she fix it? Did she even want to? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of her husband's footsteps. He entered the kitchen and stood there for a moment, not saying anything. The air between them was thick with tension. Finally, he spoke. "We need to talk," he said, his voice stiff and distant. The wife nodded, unsure of what to say. She had spent so long avoiding this conversation, afraid of the truth it might reveal. But now, it seemed inevitable. "About what?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "About everything. About what's been happening between us." His words hung in the air, and the wife felt her heart race. She hadn't expected him to bring it up, not like this. Not after everything that had happened. "I know things have been bad," he continued, "but I don't know how we got here. It's like we've been drifting apart for years, and I didn't even notice until now." She looked at him, her mind racing. Could it be true? Had he really not noticed? She had felt the distance for so long, but to hear him admit it, was it a sign of hope, or was it too late? "It's not just you," she said softly. "I've been just as blind. We've both been living in this bubble, pretending everything is fine." He met her gaze, and for the first time in a long time, she saw a flicker of emotion in his eyes. It wasn't love, not exactly, but it was something, regret, maybe. "What do we do now?" he asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. The wife took a deep breath, her mind still racing. What did they do now? Maya's slap had made her face the truth. She couldn't keep living in denial, pretending that everything was okay when it was falling apart. The question was, did they still have time to fix it? Could they? Or had they already crossed a point of no return? She didn't know the answer, but she knew one thing for sure. Things couldn't stay the way they were. The silence stretched between them again, but it was different this time. It wasn't suffocating. It was full of possibility. "We start by being honest," she said quietly. "No more pretending. No more living in a lie." Her husband didn't answer right away, but he didn't walk away either. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. Days passed, and the silence between the wife and her husband continued to linger in their home, but something had shifted. It wasn't the same suffocating silence that had consumed them for years. It was different now, filled with the weight of truth, with the possibility of change. The wife found herself in a constant state of reflection, haunted by the words Maya had left her with. "You have a choice now." It kept repeating in her mind, over and over again. Maya had given her a choice, a chance to reclaim something she thought was lost forever. But the question remained, could she actually do it? Could she face the reality of her failing marriage, of the years she had spent ignoring the cracks, the emotional distance, the resentment that had quietly grown between her and her husband? She wasn't sure, but for the first time in a long while, she felt ready to try. One evening, after dinner, the wife found herself sitting in the living room, alone. The house was quiet. the faint hum of the air conditioning the only sound breaking the stillness. She stared at the walls, at the expensive paintings and the pristine furniture, the life she had worked so hard to build. It all seemed so meaningless now, compared to the raw, unspoken truth she had been avoiding. Her husband walked into the room, his face unreadable. For a moment, neither of them spoke. He sat down across from her, and the tension in the room grew thick again. But this time, it felt different. She could feel it in the air, the way he was looking at her, the way she was looking at him. Neither of them knew where to begin. Finally, he broke the silence. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice soft but firm, "about what we said the other night. About the way we've been living." She nodded, her heart racing. She had been thinking too. She knew the time had come to face everything. No more pretending, no more hiding. "I don't want this anymore," he said quietly, his words heavy with a sense of finality. "I don't want to live like this. I don't want us to keep going in circles, pretending everything is fine when it's not." She looked at him, her breath catching in her throat. This was it, the moment they had both been avoiding. "I don't either," she replied softly. "I've been so focused on everything else, on the appearance of it all, that I forgot what really matters. I forgot what I really want." The weight of her own words settled over her, and she realized how true they were. For years, she had hidden behind her wealth, her status, her image as the perfect wife. But in doing so, she had lost sight of the love that once existed between them. She had allowed their relationship to wither away, to become something that resembled a business arrangement more than a marriage. She had been so caught up in maintaining the illusion of perfection that she hadn't even noticed the love slipping away. Now, sitting across from her husband, she knew she had to make a choice. She could either continue down the path of denial, of keeping up appearances for the sake of the world, or she could fight for what she still had left. And for the first time, she felt something stirring inside her, a glimmer of hope. She wasn't sure if it was too late, but she knew that if they were going to fix anything, they had to start by being honest with themselves. "So what now?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. He looked at her, his gaze softening. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I think the first step is admitting we're both broken. We've both let this happen, and it's time to face the consequences. It's time to rebuild, if we can." The wife swallowed hard, feeling a surge of emotion. She didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to give up without a fight. The road ahead would be difficult, full of hard conversations and uncomfortable truths, but for the first time, she felt like it was worth it. As her husband reached across the table and took her hand, she felt a glimmer of something she hadn't felt in years: connection. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was a start. And that, she realized, was all they needed right now: a start. The days following the conversation were filled with an unusual tension, but there was also a sense of quiet resolve in the air. The wife and her husband had agreed to face the cracks in their marriage, and for the first time in years, they both knew that healing would take effort. It wasn't going to be easy, but they were willing to try. They had spent so much time living in denial, building walls around themselves, both physically and emotionally. Now, the walls had begun to crumble. The wife found herself reflecting on the past, on the years she had spent pretending that everything was perfect. She had always been the picture of success, always the confident, poised woman who had it all together. But deep down, she knew she had been hiding from the truth. She had been afraid to face the reality that her marriage was falling apart, that the man she had once loved had become a stranger to her, and she had been too proud to admit it. But now, things were different. She had allowed herself to see the cracks, and in doing so, she had found the courage to take a step toward healing. Every day was a new challenge. She found herself looking at her husband differently, wondering if there was still a spark between them, if there was still something worth saving. But each time they spoke, there was a glimmer of hope. They were being honest with each other, for the first time in years. The wife had started to see things she had ignored before, the small gestures of kindness, the moments of vulnerability they shared in the quiet hours of the night. They were both broken, yes, but they were willing to heal together. It wasn't perfect, and there were still days when the weight of their past mistakes threatened to overwhelm them. But there was something that kept them going: hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild what they had lost. As the days passed, the wife found herself thinking about Maya. The slap had been a catalyst, Yes, but it had also been a gift. Maya had given her the push she needed to finally face the truth. Without that moment of confrontation, she might have spent the rest of her life pretending. But Maya had shown her that it was okay to be vulnerable, to admit that things weren't perfect. Maya had given her the courage to face the truth. The wife knew that she owed a great deal of her newfound perspective to Maya, the maid she had so often overlooked. She was grateful for Maya, for her strength, for her wisdom. Maya had been the one to make her see what was truly important in life. Not wealth, not status, not appearances, but honesty, connection, and love. And now, as the wife and her husband worked to rebuild their relationship, she realized that they were doing so not just for themselves, but for the family they had almost lost. The road ahead was still uncertain, but it was a road they were both willing to walk down together. They had both been broken, but they had also both been given a chance to rebuild. And for the first time in a long while, the wife felt like they had a real chance at happiness. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she also knew it would be worth it. With every small step forward, with every difficult conversation, they were learning to trust each other again, learning to be open, learning to love. The journey was just beginning, and while there was still much to be done, the wife was no longer afraid of what lay ahead. She had the courage to face the future, and with her husband by her side, she knew they could rebuild their family. The hardest part was over. They had faced the truth, and now they could move forward, together. The wife sat in her study, staring at the papers in front of her. It had been weeks since that night, and things between her and her husband had slowly begun to improve, but there was still so much left to work through. The journey they were on felt like a slow, painful climb, but every day they took another step forward, together. She had never imagined that confronting the truth would be so difficult. For so long, she had buried her feelings, pretending that everything was fine, that the perfect life she had built around her was enough to keep her happy. But Maya's slap had torn down that illusion in a single moment, forcing her to face a reality she had been running from for years. She thought back to those days before the slap, when she had been so consumed by appearances, so focused on maintaining the image of the perfect family. She had forgotten what it was like to truly connect with her husband, to feel the spark that had once brought them together. Now, with each passing day, she was rediscovering what it meant to love, to be vulnerable, to be honest. Her husband had changed too. He had started to open up, to talk about his own feelings, to show that he cared in ways he hadn't before. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was something they both needed. It was in the small moments, the shared glances, the quiet conversations in the middle of the night, that they were rebuilding their bond. There was still work to be done, but the cracks between them were starting to heal. And as they worked together, they began to rediscover each other, to rebuild a foundation of trust and understanding. The wife couldn't help but think back to the role Maya had played in all of this. Maya had been the catalyst, the one who had shaken her out of her complacency and made her see the truth. She had been the one to remind her that family wasn't about appearances or wealth. It was about connection, love, and the willingness to be vulnerable. Without Maya's intervention, the wife wasn't sure she would have had the courage to face the truth. But now, with the benefit of hindsight, she saw Maya's actions in a new light. Maya had done more than just challenge her. She had helped her rediscover what truly mattered. As the wife reflected on all of this, she realized that her journey of self-discovery was far from over. The road ahead was still uncertain, and there were bound to be more challenges along the way. But for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. She had taken the first step toward healing, and though it hadn't been easy, she knew it had been worth it. She thought of Maya, the woman who had played such an unexpected role in her life. Maya had done what no one else could. She had made her see the truth, and in doing so, she had given her the chance to rebuild her family. The wife didn't know what Maya's future held, but she knew that she would always be grateful for the wake-up call Maya had given her. And as she sat there, staring at the papers in front of her, she realized that she was no longer afraid of the future. Whatever came next, she would face it with honesty, with courage, and with the love she had almost lost. And for the first time in years, she felt ready to move forward. It had been weeks since the conversation, and while the road to healing was far from smooth, there was a noticeable shift in the air. The house, which had once felt suffocating, was now filled with a different kind of energy. The wife and her husband had started to rebuild what had once seemed irreparable. They spoke more openly, more honestly, about their emotions, their fears, and their dreams. Every conversation was a small step forward, a small attempt to understand each other once more. Their home, which had long been a symbol of their failure to connect, now began to feel like a place of healing. The wife felt the weight of the past still hovering over them, but the lightness of their newfound connection made it bearable. She could no longer ignore the work that had to be done, but she was no longer afraid to face it. The challenges were still there. Old habits didn't die easily, and the wounds they had both suffered still stung, but they were determined to try. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of silence, still times when the distance between them felt too wide, but those moments became fewer. The wife found herself starting to believe in the possibility of change. One evening, as she sat with her husband in the living room, she couldn't help but notice how different things felt. They had just finished dinner, and for the first time in what felt like years, they were talking without tension, without the undercurrent of resentment. They were simply being present with each other. It was a quiet, simple moment, but for her, it was everything. Her husband turned to her, his eyes softening. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice unsteady. "About us. About everything." The wife held her breath. She knew this conversation was coming, but she didn't know how it would unfold. "I know I've been distant," he continued. "I've been so focused on the wrong things, on the image of the perfect family, the perfect marriage. And in doing so, I pushed you away." She listened, her heart tightening as he spoke. For so long, she had felt invisible to him, like a mere accessory in his life. But now he was acknowledging her, truly seeing her for the first time in years. "I don't want to keep living like that," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I want to rebuild with you. I want to fix this." The wife looked at him, her chest heavy with the weight of his words. She had waited so long to hear them. But now, hearing them, she wasn't sure what to say. Could she forgive him for everything? Could she really move forward, knowing the past was still so fresh? But as she looked into his eyes, she realized something important. She didn't have to have all the answers. They didn't have to fix everything at once. What mattered was that they were both willing to try. She reached out and took his hand, a small but powerful gesture. "I want that too," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. "But it's going to take time. It won't be easy, but I think we can make it work." He nodded, squeezing her hand gently. "We'll take it one day at a time," he said, a small smile playing at the corners of his lips. Together. It wasn't a perfect resolution, and they knew there was still much to be done. But for the first time in a long time, they both felt like they were on the same page. The wife realized that while their journey was far from over, it had begun in earnest. They were no longer living in denial, no longer pretending that everything was fine. They had faced the truth, and now, they were willing to rebuild. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time, the wife felt like she had a real chance at happiness, not the kind that came from wealth or status, but the kind that came from honesty, vulnerability, and love. And as they sat together, hand in hand, she knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. Weeks passed, and although their relationship was still fragile, there was a noticeable change in the atmosphere within the house. The wife and her husband had made significant strides in confronting the truth about their marriage. Their conversations, once shallow and transactional, were now more meaningful, filled with raw honesty. There were still moments of tension, of awkward silence, but they were learning to communicate in a way that felt genuine, not forced. The wife found herself reflecting on how far they had come. It had not been easy. Every conversation felt like peeling back another layer of years of resentment, of pain that had been buried for too long. But there was a shift in her, in how she saw her husband. She could no longer view him as just the man who had distanced himself from her for years. She was beginning to see the complexities of his emotions, the fears and insecurities he had hidden away. The walls between them were coming down, slowly but surely. They still weren't where they wanted to be, but the road ahead, although uncertain, no longer felt impossible. The wife found herself thinking about Maya more often. It was impossible not to, given how pivotal she had been in all of this. Without Maya's intervention, without that slap that had forced her to face the truth, she wasn't sure where they would be now. Maya had done more than just challenge her. It was as if she had opened a door to something the wife had been too afraid to walk through. Maya's courage had forced her to take a hard look at her own life, at her marriage, and at the choices she had been making. It was a sobering realization, one that she was still grappling with, but also one that had allowed her to take the first real steps toward healing. One evening, after a long day, the wife sat alone in the living room, reflecting on everything. She thought about the future. She thought about the family they had almost lost, and the chance they now had to rebuild. She wasn't naive. She knew it wouldn't be easy, that there were still so many unanswered questions, so many scars that would take time to heal. But for the first time in a long time, she believed that it was possible. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. Her husband entered the room, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was comfortable now, not awkward. They didn't need words to fill the space between them anymore. They understood each other in a way they hadn't for years. Finally, he spoke. "I've been thinking," he said softly, "about how much work we still have to do. But I think we're on the right path. We're not perfect, but we're trying, and that's what matters." She looked at him, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "We've got a long way to go," she said, her voice steady. "But I'm willing to take this journey with you." He nodded, his eyes softening as he walked over to her and sat down beside her. "We'll take it one day at a time, right?" he said, his voice thick with emotion. She nodded in return, and for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of peace. The road ahead was still uncertain, but the foundation they were rebuilding together was strong. They had both made mistakes, they had both hurt each other, but now they were willing to move forward with honesty, with vulnerability, and with love. The journey was far from over, but the wife knew that they were no longer stuck in the past. They were learning to trust again, to communicate again, and most importantly, to love again. And as they sat together in silence, the future didn't seem so daunting anymore. There was hope in the air, a quiet, steadfast hope that they could make it through, together. It had been a month since the wife and her husband had begun the difficult but necessary work of rebuilding their relationship. Every day was a small victory, and though there were still moments of tension, there was a newfound openness between them. Their conversations, once strained and filled with unspoken resentment, were now filled with real communication. They talked about their fears, their hopes, their regrets, and most importantly, they talked about what they wanted for the future. The wife had never imagined that she would find herself in this position, but now, she saw that there was hope. There was a chance for something better, something more authentic. It wasn't going to be easy, but she was willing to put in the effort. As she sat at the kitchen table one evening, her husband walked in, holding a piece of paper. She looked up, wondering what was going on. He handed it to her without saying a word. She glanced at it and immediately recognized what it was, an old family photo album, one that had been tucked away in a dusty corner of their closet for years. "I was going through some old things," he said, his voice soft. "And I found this. I thought it might be time to look back, to remember when things were different, when we were happy." The wife felt a lump form in her throat. Looking at the album brought back memories of the early days of their marriage, the laughter, the excitement, the dreams they had shared. It felt like a lifetime ago, but as she flipped through the pages, she saw something else, something that made her pause. There were pictures of their children, moments of joy, moments that had been overshadowed by the years of neglect. And as she looked at the photos, she realized something important. It wasn't just their marriage that needed work. It was their entire family. Their children had grown up in a house filled with tension, where love had taken a back seat to appearances. The wife knew that if they were going to heal, they needed to start by healing as a family. "We've been so focused on ourselves," she said quietly, looking up from the album. "We've forgotten about them." Her husband nodded, his expression filled with regret. "I know. I've been selfish. But we can make it right. We can rebuild, not just us, but everything. Our family, our lives." The wife felt a spark of hope. For the first time in a long time, she felt like they were on the same page. They weren't just focused on fixing their marriage. They were focused on healing their entire family, on making sure that their children had a better future, a future built on love and trust. As the evening wore on, they made plans to spend more time together as a family, to create new memories, to be present in each other's lives. They knew that the road ahead would be challenging, but they also knew that they had come a long way already. The wife felt a weight lift off her shoulders. She no longer felt trapped by the past, by the mistakes they had both made. She felt a sense of possibility, a sense of renewal. Together, they could build something new, something better. And for the first time in years, she felt truly hopeful about their future. They had started to rebuild, and the journey was only just beginning. The following weeks were filled with small, quiet victories. The wife and her husband worked together, slowly rebuilding the trust and connection they had lost over the years. There were still moments of discomfort, still lingering doubts about whether they could truly heal. But as they spent more time together, the distance between them continued to shrink. They began to laugh again, to enjoy the simple moments that had once seemed so trivial. The wife realized how much they had missed over the years. The intimacy of shared silence, the comfort of holding hands, the joy of just being in each other's presence without the weight of unspoken resentment. They didn't rush things. They knew that trust, once broken, took time to rebuild. Every small step forward felt like a triumph. The conversations that had once been filled with bitterness now flowed with understanding and empathy. The wife found herself more open to her husband's feelings, more willing to listen without judgment, without the walls of defensiveness she had once built around herself. Her husband, too, was learning to be more vulnerable. He started sharing more of his thoughts and fears, things he had kept buried for far too long. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Their family dynamic began to shift as well. They spent more time together as a family, rediscovering the joy of simple moments. Family dinners, weekend outings, and even quiet nights spent watching movies together. It was a slow, steady process, but the wife could see the difference. The tension in the house had started to dissipate. Their children, who had been quietly affected by the strain between their parents, began to relax. The wife could see the difference in their behavior, too. They were smiling more, engaging with their parents in a way they hadn't in years. The wife felt a quiet sense of pride in what they had accomplished. They had started to rebuild, not just their marriage, but their family as a whole. They were learning to communicate in ways they never had before, opening up about their feelings, their struggles, and their hopes for the future. It wasn't perfect, and there were still difficult days, but for the first time in a long while, the wife felt like they were on the right path. One evening, as she sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, her husband joined her. He sat down beside her, his hand resting gently on hers. For a moment, they just sat there in silence, enjoying the peacefulness that had returned to their home. Finally, he spoke. "I know we still have a long way to go," he said, his voice filled with sincerity, "but I'm proud of us. I'm proud of how far we've come." She smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. "I am too," she replied softly. "We've been through a lot, but I think we're finally starting to find our way back to each other." He nodded, squeezing her hand. "We'll keep working on it, one day at a time." She nodded in agreement, feeling the weight of his words. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she also knew that they were stronger now than they had been before. The road ahead was still uncertain, but together, they had the strength to face whatever challenges lay ahead. And for the first time in a long time, the wife felt a sense of peace. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew that, whatever came next, they would face it as a team. As the weeks turned into months, the wife and her husband continued to grow together. It was not a smooth journey. There were moments of doubt, moments of frustration, but there was also progress. They had found a rhythm, a way of communicating that they had never had before. The silence that had once filled their home was now replaced with conversation, laughter, and understanding. The walls between them had come down, slowly but surely. They learned to navigate their relationship with a renewed sense of care, love, and patience. The wife felt lighter, more hopeful than she had in years, had built around themselves. The wife had come to realize that while wealth and status were fleeting, the connections they had, those were what mattered. It was these relationships, built on trust, communication, and mutual respect, that formed the true foundation of a fulfilling life. As the sun set one evening, the wife stood by the window, looking out over the yard. Her husband joined her, placing a hand on her shoulder. They were in this together now, and the road ahead, though uncertain, was one they would walk together. The wife felt a sense of peace wash over her. The family they had almost lost was now healing, and the love that had once seemed lost was finding its way back into their hearts. For the first time in a long time, she felt whole again. The future was still unknown, but they had already started building something new. A future based on honesty, love, and the strength to face whatever came their way.